Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX14 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new World of Warships gameplay today on our channel. In this episode I'm sailing out in the Tier VII British Light Cruiser, known as the Fiji, in a Tier VII Standard Battle on the map Two Brothers. Joined by my good friends Ben and Z, sailing out in their respective Tier VII ships, the focus of today's gameplay is not on my application of the Fiji, or the tactics I employ, nor is it on our division teamwork. It's on a much simpler and more holistic concept. That is, the standard battle game type. Now you may be scratching your head at this point and wondering what on earth am I on about. It's quite simple, this one. I make a lot of mistakes in standard battles in particular, simply because I forget that there are three objectives. Number one is the unofficial objective of eliminating the entirety of the enemy fleet. It's not an objective on the minimap as such, it's something you can go for to win the match. Then there is the second objective, an official one on the minimap, which is capture the enemy base and you're guaranteed the win. And then there's the third objective that I'm inclined to forget about, and I believe a good number of you watching this will be inclined to forget about. Defending your own base, because if that's captured, the enemy team get an auto win. Now the reason I'm raising this is because this is a brilliant gameplay to demonstrate that it's not a bad idea, it's not being cowardly to realise when you need to come off of the offensive and go on the defensive. And whilst I'm not going to make the decision, and unfortunately you won't be able to hear the comms going on between myself, Z and Ben, you'll find that Z makes a key call in this game, telling us we need to go back and defend from the enemy fleet's push. And the reason I elected this gameplay in particular is because Two Brothers is a map where typically both teams will crash into one another on a particular side of the map, i.e. the majority of both fleets will go one way and crash into each other. Alternatively, the majority of both fleets will go separate ways, i.e. as we're going east, the enemy team will be going west in this instance, and they'll rotate around each other, this case counterclockwise. And what it means is it becomes effectively a race against time for one fleet to be able to make it to the enemy's cap before the other does, and cap out. But that doesn't always work out because it all comes down to whether the defending ships are able to delay the attacking fleet for long enough, alternatively that a destroyer that runs back is able to hold up the cap for long enough to be able to enable their team to be able to take the objective. So it comes a little bit more down to what goes on a one-by-one basis. Instead, if we move away from particular situations and focus on the bigger picture, keep it holistic, what we'll find is that you need to recognise sometimes when you need to go on the defensive and fend off the incoming attack, rather than continue to go on a bloodthirsty rampage and chase down the enemy ships that are retreating, alternatively just caught out of position, such as this Kirov here, who I tried to punish with some citadels or at least meaty penetrations. The armour pierce on this ship in particular, citadeling for 3100 HP of damage as we knock out the lead turret of that Kirov for a small period of time. Now looking at the minimap, I would encourage you to spend 50% of your time during this gameplay looking at the minimap and 50% of your time looking at what's actually going on the screen. What you'll find is that the majority of our fleet has gone eastwards and we're gradually pushing forward, and a good chunk of the enemy team so far has gone to defend this avenue, but at the same time a good chunk have gone towards the west. And we can see that the distribution is gradually forming up to be 5 enemy ships this side, 7 on the western side, and as for our own fleet it's going to be 9 this side and 3 on the other side. Now you can automatically expect what could potentially happen on the western side, i.e. the number gap is so significant in favour of the enemy team that our 3 ships are going to fall apart, especially seeing as they don't have the destroyer to act as the front line spotter, for our battleships in particular who may overextend and fall victim to the enemy destroyers, whereby the enemy team have 2 destroyers to our 1. Now this doesn't mean that the match is biased in terms of ship composition, but it's something you have to be aware of. When you've got the deficit in destroyers, it means that on a defensive situation, your ability to be able to effectively spot the incoming attackers is a little bit more compromised because you don't have that stealthy small ship able to sit a little bit further out the front and act as a picket line. In the meantime, we're just using smoke here in order to just rain down some fire on the enemy battleships at distance, using our 15.4 kilometers range to the greatest possible effect, along with our hydroacoustic search to be able to spot torpedoes as they're coming in, mitigating the damage that could be dealt to our battleships. In the meantime, we look again at the minimap, and what we can see is that our teammates are already starting to retreat, or at least our cruisers are, and our Iron Duke is pushing further and further out of position, i.e. the British battleship. Now this means very quickly the anchor of the western side of our map for the team, the western side of the map for our team is going to fall apart, or at least be subjected to a large amount of fire, whether it be torpedoes or artillery. We try to punish his Kirov once again, and this time we do pick up a citadel, scoring a nice 7,200 damage salvo and dodging the incoming fire in return. I could get what the Kirov was going for. It was quite a smart play. They just needed a little bit more angling on their ship, trying to punish those of us who would cross the gaps on the southern side of this side of the map and try to expose a broadside in our open fire and say this Fiji, or alternatively the battleships, and the Kirov could punish us with the very meaty 180mm armour piercing on that Tier 5 Russian cruiser, but it wasn't to be for them today, or at least for now. In the meantime, we're trying to help out get rid of this Fiji, who's going to be a thorn in our team side the longer it's alive. But coming back to the minimap, we can now see the enemy's push on the western side is in full force, and with our Iron Duke completely cut off from its cruisers, who have retreated through the cap, not criticising them, just pointing out the obvious. As a result, that means that Iron Duke is going to fall down very quickly, and now we've got no defensive anchor on that side. And it's at this point you can see that one player in particular has made a decision, and it's an important one. Zen's Ashitaka, the Tier 7 premium Japanese battleship. He's elected, he's telling us over TeamSpeak right now, i.e. Ben and I, we need to defend, otherwise it's going to be too late if we keep pushing. So having eliminated the enemy Fiji, I'm going to get into a position to delay my return because I'm a fast ship. Ben can afford to do so as well if he wants because he's in a fast ship, i.e. the Akatsuki is a fast destroyer, being able to get to speeds towards 38 if not 40 knots, depending on the situation. And the same, I've got the concealment and the top speed of 32.5 knots to be able to rush back when needs be. Our battleships on the other hand, such as our Colorado and Nagato and the Ashitaka, will take a longer period of time to get back. And it's getting your battleships back which is important, because then they can start to hold up the enemy's push, and it means the cruisers that act as the rear guard, just providing some harassing fire against the enemy fleet that's retreating, can afford a little bit more time to make things uncomfortable for the retreating ships down one side, as I'm trying to do against the Leon and analyse out here, but at the same time they can then make their way back and help defend. I'm not going to go charging off down towards the northeastern corner of the map because that would be ill-advised. I'd be putting myself in an exposed position and I wouldn't be helping out my team. Now retreating, what we can see is that our team is now starting to realise in general in the chat that we need to head back. Don't push, defend, as one user has pointed out. I'm detected very briefly here by the Leon using the concealment of this ship, either Fiji's concealment by base of 11.2 kilometres or alternatively 5.4 kilometres when firing through smoke. We haven't got concealment expert here as we're only up to our 7th captain skill point if I remember correctly. We can afford to get a little bit closer to these enemy battleships and keep ourselves towards them as we make our way back. Our friendly Fiji falls down, and it's at this point that we can see our fleet is now forming a line to make their way back. It's a bit of a slow reaction, but what you'll realise is that because it's taken approximately 1.5 to 2 minutes for this response to occur, imagine if it had happened much later. So say if the enemy team had already brought their Mizuki onto the cap and brought a couple more ships towards the cap, i.e. in grid square for example, goal 4. If that had been the case, it would have been a much different and difficult situation for our team to deal with compared to what it is now. And it's by reacting early that you can help guarantee your team's ability to stay in the fight for much longer and keep it a close match. As so far our team's lost 3 ships, the enemy team's lost 2. If we started going down this way, we'd see our numbers drop a little bit faster. Although I do make the mistake here of giving too much broadside to the Leon, and it means I'm going to lose a lot of health. And this goes to show that this is a light cruiser, with the Fiji having anywhere between 9 to 114mm of armour and a citadel that's quite well exposed on the broadside. I made the mistake here as well of hitting the smoke key. I had to use the smoke generator consumable when I was looking for the hill. I haven't played British Cruisers in a very long time. So that was a bit of a waste of a smoke, but never mind, we'll make do with what we've got as we toss some shells towards the Nizal, hopefully hitting them on the broadside and getting some penetrations. Now, with Ben having made his way already into the capture point, he's able to provide spotting of the enemy cruisers and potentially enemy Mizuki as they charge in towards the point, and he can start to slow them up by tossing torpedoes, looking at the minimap here rather than what I'm doing. We can see that C in his Ashitaka has already made his way back as well, which means he can provide the supporting fire to grind the attack on the western side to a halt. So as said earlier, when you have a battleship in the defensive position, it becomes a much bigger threat, especially if it's slightly behind the front line, i.e. it's got a cruiser or a destroyer in front of it, because it becomes a very powerful defensive asset with big guns, the ability to sponge damage and become a constant threat to the enemy team's chances of pushing and therefore survival. Of course, to get around that you'd need to eliminate the destroyers that are guarding that battleship and the subsequent cruisers, and we can see here Ben has been forced to go to smoke due to a rather risky situation where he's exposed, and on top of that he hasn't got much health due to the torpedo he took towards the start of the game, so he's taken the sensible survivability option here, as he tosses some more torpedoes out towards the enemy Bayern and anything else that's heading in towards the roughly southwestern perimeter of the cap. Now we can also see that our friendly Colorado has decided to continue making their way up the eastern side. So this is the point uttered earlier, which is that when battleships go off by themselves, they can reap rewards. As we're seeing, our Colorado has taken out the analyse, but at the same time they become cut off and much more vulnerable to the enemy team. But playing as a unit here, and we're making our way back, we're starting to pick up a nice amount of damage on the Nagato, and we can see they're deflecting away from the capture point rather than heading towards it or heading parallel to it. And this is where the enemy's push is being blunted effectively as they lose their Nuremberg to Z's battleship fire. We're now on the front line with our ships as well. We've got our Fuso pushing in, and this is where the attack of the enemy team is being blunted to the point where they now have to reconsider their options and start to go on the defensive retreat. And this is how the game turns around, because if we wind back the clock approximately 6 minutes, we could say that the enemy team were in a very strong position to be able to win if our team had continued to push down the eastern side, but now it's looking much more even, with our team having lost 4 ships to the enemy's 5. So at this point as well we can start to look into how we're applying the Fiji a little bit more, because the overall principles of the standard battle have been discussed. And what we're trying to do here is push forward to act as a target for the enemy ships rather than have Ben continuously get hit by them or have the chance of being spotted and hit by them. We are of course going to have to dodge them incoming fire, and we also want to get reasonably close, particularly to the Bayern, so that way if they expose their broadside to us, or we make sure they expose their broadside to us, we get in a pincer between Ben's destroyer, Z's battleship and my own ship, we can really start to lay into their broadside with our 4 triple turrets mounted in the ABXY configuration. And here we start to really open up with our 7.5 second reload, which has dropped down somewhat with the fact we've got Adrenaline Rush as our tier 2 captain skill, and we're just cutting into them as Ben falls to the guns of the Bayern. And we can see that our Colorado has fallen down by the enemy Akatsuki, and that's where the battleship going off by itself is very vulnerable to destroyers. In trying to rip into this Bayern at this point, we can also see that Z is going to be throwing him some shells to try and rip it to pieces, whereby his armour piercing is going to do a lot more than our armour piercing over time. But in picking up this nice meaty damage, we can see that the Bayern's pulling back, and then he falls to Z's battleship guns. And we've also got the shores in the middle of the map, which we're not too worried about. Now the reason for this is if that shores wants to push through, it's a very light but very fast cruiser, a Soviet cruiser of tier 7, it's going to be very limited in what it can do. It can't bring all 12 guns to bear, mounted in an ABXY configuration much like our ship, because the ship's got a very large profile, and with the limited amount of firing angles available in the centre of the map, that shores is going to be better off having to either push all the way through into the cap, or alternatively pulling all the way back and going on the defensive. So instead we're pushing forward and trying to go toe to toe with these 2 battleships. Now it doesn't matter if it's a Wyoming or a New York there, it's still a valid threat, but the most important one at the moment we want to try and get rid of, or at least cripple, is the enemy Nagato, because that is in a way their capital ship at this point. It's a tier 7 battleship, and with ship numbers dwindling, the higher tier ships can really come into effect now. Although that Wyoming could still do a good job, but in general the characteristics of Nagato would say that she's going to be the more powerful ship if played well over time. When I don't have a chance to fire at the Nagato, I'll be switching to the Wyoming, and I'm also taking my time in moving towards these ships for 2 reasons. One, my smoke's not available, meaning that I don't have the ability to use it as cover to really start to open up with damage per minute, and on top of that we have to consider that they still have, the enemy team still has, a Mizuki that's unaccounted for, and it's regularly tossing torpedoes from the southern side of the map towards our ships, focusing in particular on our Fuso and Ashitaka, IZ ship. If those torpedoes are able to score hits, then it really becomes a problem. Now you could argue at this point, why am I not going after the destroyer myself? Well, the difficulty I've got is where I position myself, I'm actually in a bad spot for going destroyer hunting. To be able to charge down towards the south, I'd have to come out and expose broadside to the 2 enemy battleships. And with our Fuso in particular positioned off to what is my port side, it means that I'd have to cross the Fuso and potentially sail right into the torpedo line of the Mizuki. Now in return I'll be able to spot those torpedoes and use the nimbleness of my ship in order to be able to dodge the incoming torpedoes. That is true, whether I had a shift of 6.9 seconds as displayed here, but then I'll be exposing my broadside to the enemy battleships and I'm putting myself in a 2-prong. It's bad positioning, and what I should have really done is sailed out south to begin with, used range against these battleships and gone hunting the Mizuki immediately. And we can see now the results, as it effectively has cost us our Fuso. and that's my bad. With the Nagato now disappearing for a little bit because I had to go to smoke in order to try and maximise my ability to keep my guns firing, get all 12 guns firing, switch to the Wyoming whilst Z continues to push forward to hunt the Nagato and push the Mitsuki further back into the southwestern corner of the map. Because whilst he may not be able to catch it and spot it, if he keeps going after it, then the Mitsuki's play space becomes more limited unless they want to get spotted in the first place and then have to go toe to toe with Z's guns, and then I can bring my guns to bear. With the Nagato's starting to pull back as well, this game is still in the balance, we must say that. What we can see at this point is as the Nagato pulls back, we now need to consider what's going on the other side of the map. So it's back to the mini-map time, because the enemy team have actually revived their push on the eastern side. All of our team, meanwhile, all 5 of our ships are focused so heavily on the western side that we may be forgetting what's going on. And again, at this point, Z has called out over the TeamSpeak, we need to now look towards the east. Because if we don't, then we'll have a Leon and a Nakazuki shooting us in the back, and over time they're going to cause more damage than this retreating Nagato. So what I decided to do is start to reverse and move out of the smoke. The logic being that whilst I've got 30 seconds left on the smoke before it starts to fade away, I can throw in a couple more remnant salvos, but now that Nagato's at 14 km and sailing directly away, 15.4 km range, and what are the base muzzle velocity when firing of these 6-inch guns being, let me just check my notes, 841 meters per second. As we go to longer and longer ranges, they're going to become ineffectual. But fortunately for us, Z was able to get the kill on the Nagato, freeing himself up to now come around and attack the enemy ships here. And again, whilst I should effectively be going after the Mitsuki to try and take them out, it's going to be more important at this point for us to come about and fend off the attack coming from the east. And it means that Z's had to take a couple of torpedo hits, but in return, now going back in this 4 versus 4 encounter, we can really start to close the distance on the enemy Akazuki, which could be argued is the bigger threat at this point, than being in the cap and having the ability to launch 3 triple sets of torpedoes, which can be absolutely devastating when they hit. And we'll be able to rip them to pieces whilst they're exposed. Picking up a nice salvo there with only 3 of our shells, doing 3,000 damage, and now we begin to really lay into the Akazuki. We've engaged our hydroacoustics, that way if there's torpedoes in the water, we'll spot them before they hit our Nagato, alternatively hit us and we can react to them. And the Akazuki goes quiet for a bit and disappears, so we'll need to get a little bit closer to pursue them. Now one thing to note, I'm not being targeted here by either the enemy shores or the enemy Leon, and that is because we've got a Nagato on the front line distracting their attention. As we pick up another nice little salvo on the Akazuki, not finishing them off, but they're pretty much knocking on death's door as our Grasp A fishes them off. With them eliminated, spotting the torpedoes at the Akazuki's front, we can now react to those thanks to the early warning of our hydroacoustic, and we'll be able to slot ourselves nicely between the gap that's formed. Now we're exposing a broadside here to those 2 enemy ships, and if they were more alert they'd be able to punish us for it, but because our Nagato's in such a position to cover us off in terms of attention, and they're on low health to provide an appetising target, it means that we're able to avoid taking incoming broadside fire. One could argue we've got lucky, and we can now start to try and rip into the shores. A little bit unlucky there not to give enough lead to really punish their broadside, as we do pick up a 3 Citadel hit and pick up our high caliber. We continue to try to rip into the shores and take them out for a kill. And now we're going to use the wreckage of our friendly Nagato in order to provide a frustration point for the Leon. And that is, if they want to use their guns on us, they're going to have to try and thread the needle around the wreck of our Nagato. Which is why, as you'll see, they're not targeting us to the point where they're going to open fire. They're trying to find a firing solution on us, but they switch off in the end and go towards Z instead, who opens fire and rips them to pieces from the front, wrapping them up and out of the game. And that's pretty much the game at this point, because with only 2 minutes left on the clock, it could be argued that we can now go hunt the Mitsuki. And I actually made the mistake here in game of forgetting how much time's left on the clock, and that's another little observation to make. Always keep an eye on the timer every so often, because if there's only 1.5 minutes approximately left on the game as there is now, there's no need to go Mitsuki hunting when your team's got, say, a 150 point lead. Instead, just sail away from the destroyer, because what you have to consider is, despite its torpedo range being significant, for a destroyer that's pursuing to be able to use its torpedoes effectively, it will need to be a good distance within its range towards you. So if it's got 7 kilometers range, it will need to be approximately 4.5 to 4 kilometers away from you to be able to use that torpedo range against you. And we know that the Mitsuki has to be down in the southwestern corner of the map, because that's where they were last spotted, and they can't have made their way around what are the position of our Grasp A towards the northern section of our base, myself in the centre and Z south of it, so the Mitsuki can't have got through the 3 of us. So now we're just going to run. We've got 50 seconds left on the clock, just run away and live to fight another day, and with our team having the points advantage, that's going to be the end of the match. A worthy victory from a hard-fought battle. We can see that our battle performance amounted to a total damage output of 142,207 HP damage, and we also picked up 2 heroic achievements. The first, the Confederate, for damage at least 6 enemy ships, whereby the damage caused to each ship must exceed 20% of their normal health pool, and we also picked up the High Caliber, for damage at least 4 enemy ships, where the damage caused must exceed 30% of the total health pool of all the ships in the enemy team. Coming on to the team scores, we can see that we topped our team in terms of base experience earned, picking up 2,174. We can attribute this to our ability to continue dumping out fire from our 6-inch guns on a number of foes over the course of the game, whether it be those we encountered during the opening eastern push, alternatively our defence of our base, and then the return to the east to defend off the final push of the enemy team. This serves to highlight how the mobility of a cruiser such as the Fiji and the consistent firing output can rack up a lot of damage and really make a difference to the team. And really this match was all about the team, because if it were not for our team reacting to the incoming offensive from the southwest by the enemy team in the midpoint of the match, then it would have been a far different outcome in my personal opinion. Most likely a loss or a very hard fought victory where we'd have to have really gone above and beyond in order to be able to pull the victory out of the bag. And I must be grateful to my 2 division mates for pointing out when we had to go back onto the defensive rather than be on the offensive down the eastern side. Without them, I would have sailed merrily eastwards and forgotten what the actual objective that we needed to defend was. Coming on to our detailed report, we have no major items to note today, although one can see how we managed to pick up our Confederate award while of us damaging 9 enemy ships, 2 of which we went on to destroy. This all comes down to that flexibility in knowing when to be on the offensive versus the defensive, and changing up your focus in terms of looking down one side of the map and then moving on to another side of the map, engaging foes you hadn't originally engaged rather than becoming caught up in engaging at 1 or 2 particular ships for a very long period of time. And if we had continued to go down the eastern side, we would have been continuing to ramp up fire against the enemy Nizal and the enemy Leon until the end of the game, or until the end of our ship's lifespan. And finally, coming on to our credits and experience earned, we can see that after additions and deductions, we walked away with 204,282 Silver Lions and 6,621 Commander experience. To conclude, hopefully today we have demonstrated the importance of realising that there's not only just a need for you to attack the enemy's base in the standard battle game type, but there's also the key need for you to defend your own base and make sure that the enemy team do not overrun it and capture it. It's something that's overlooked on a regular basis simply because we can become rather engaged in the thought of chasing down the enemy fleet towards their base and pushing them out of it, and I'm guilty of it as well as many other players of World of Warships. So instead, perhaps we sometimes need to realise that the standard battle game type can be very back and forth. Sometimes you're on the offence, sometimes you're on the defence, and it's being able to realise when you need to switch between the two that's going to make the difference for you and your team. And so I've been TX141, and if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future World of Warships videos on this channel. And if you're looking to get into World of Warships today, I thoroughly enjoy it and I can recommend it to all of you, then be sure to use the link in the description of this video, as you'll be able to sign up for free and get set sailing on the high seas. But until next time, as always ladies and gentlemen, take care and fair seas.